I said, this is Troy Anthony Davis, and I've been sitting on Georgia's death row for 16 years for a crime I did not commit. It's been a struggle for me and my family, as well as the victim's family, who I sympathize with fairly, simply because they have been cheated out of justice just as I have.
7 witnesses took the stand during this afternoon's hearing under tight security. Neither cameras nor many spectators were allowed in the courtroom. Each supported the charge. Troy Davis, seen here following his arrest, shot and killed Officer Mark MacPhail. Davis wasn't present for the 3.5-hour hearing, but his family and the wife of the slain officer were. 4 witnesses testified they were there the morning of August 19th. They say the incident began at a pool hall when Davis and 2 others started a fight with a man over beer. The 3 followed that man, Larry Young, to the nearby Burger King parking lot where Davis hit Young in the head with a .38 caliber pistol. Young's girlfriend ran for help. MacPhail, who was working off-duty in Burger King, responded, running into the parking lot with his nightstick. Witnesses say the officer told the 3 to stop. 2 ran, but Davis turned, raised his gun, and fired. The gun clicked. MacPhail reached for his own weapon, but never made it. Davis shot the officer. He fell. Then witnesses say Davis stood over him and fired several more times before running into nearby Yamacraw Village. One witness said he had a smirky smile on his face as he pulled the trigger. Davis's family lived.
It was just past 11 p.m. on September 21st, 2011, when the state of Georgia strapped a man to a gurney and injected a lethal dose of pentobarbital into his veins. Troy Anthony Davis, 42 years old, declared his innocence one last time. "I am innocent," he said. "I did not kill your son. I did not have a gun." Then, with a final breath, he told his family, "Keep the faith." Outside the prison gates, hundreds stood in vigil. Across the world, millions watched, tweeted, prayed. Amnesty International had called for clemency. The Pope, Jimmy Carter, Desmond Tutu, and even former FBI agents said the case was too riddled with doubt to end in death. And yet, Davis was executed for the 1989 murder of an off-duty Savannah police officer, Mark MacPhail. This wasn't just another execution. It became one of the most controversial capital punishment cases in American history. At its heart, a young black man condemned on eyewitness testimony alone. No physical evidence, no murder weapon. Over time, 7 of the 9 key witnesses recanted, some saying they were coerced by police. But despite years of appeals and international attention, the courts never granted him a new trial. So what really happened the night Officer MacPhail was killed? Was Troy Davis a cold-blooded murderer, or a symbol of everything broken in the U.S. justice system? Let's go back to where it all began. Thank you for watching and helping us grow this channel. It truly means a lot. Before we dive into today's story, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Your location helps us tailor our content to connect with you better. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, please like this video and leave a comment and subscribe. Let's keep this conversation alive. Before the world ever knew his name, Troy Anthony Davis was just another young man from Savannah, Georgia. On the night of August 18th, 1989, Davis was doing what many 20-year-olds do, hanging out with friends. He attended a pool party in the Cloverdale neighborhood, a tight-knit black community just west of downtown. He left the gathering that evening with a friend named Daryl Collins, unaware that within hours, his name would be tied to a murder that would shake the nation. As they walked, a car passed, and someone inside began shouting obscenities. Suddenly, gunfire erupted. Someone from the group of teens on the street returned fire. A young man named Michael Cooper, sitting in the car, was struck in the jaw. Davis and Collins were in the middle of it, but neither was injured. From there, they made their way to the Yamacraw Village area and stopped at a local pool hall on Oglethorpe Avenue. Hours later, they walked to a nearby Burger King parking lot, just down the street. That decision would change Davis's life forever. In the Burger King lot, they came upon Sylvester "Red" Coles, a man Davis knew from the neighborhood. Coles was arguing with Larry Young, a homeless man, allegedly over alcohol. Witnesses say Young was pistol-whipped during the altercation. He was bloodied and confused, but couldn't identify who had hit him. Several witnesses described seeing a man in a white shirt strike Young, and Davis was wearing white that night. It was close to 1:15 a.m. on August 19th when Officer Mark MacPhail, a a 27-year-old off-duty Savannah police officer, approached the scene. He was moonlighting as a security guard and had rushed from the nearby bus terminal after hearing the disturbance. MacPhail never drew his weapon. He was shot twice, once through the heart and once through the face. He died on the pavement. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in digging deeper than headlines, take a second to subscribe. These are the cases the world tries to forget, and we're here to remember them. The crowd scattered. At the crime scene, police recovered shell casings from a .38 caliber pistol. Witnesses described a man in a white shirt as the shooter. Hours later, Coles went to the police and pointed the finger at Davis. He claimed Davis had assaulted Larry Young and was the one holding the gun. But Coles left out one critical fact. He himself owned a .38 caliber handgun, the same caliber used in the shooting. He told police he no longer had the weapon, claiming it was lost before it could ever be tested. That same night, Davis left for Atlanta with his sister. Police say it looked like he was fleeing. Davis's family said he was scared. Either way, the next morning, police searched his home. All they found were a pair of damp shorts and a dryer. No gun. No physical evidence. No blood. Nothing that tied him to the shooting. But the damage was done. Coles's statement had shaped the entire case. The gun that was used belonged to Coles. He was the one that told police Troy was the shooter. He claimed he lost the gun hours before the shooting. As media headlines flared, cop killed, suspect on the run, Davis's family began negotiating with police. They feared for his safety. On August 23, 1989, Davis returned to Savannah and turned himself in. He was charged with the murder of Officer Mark MacPhail, the assault on Larry Young, and the earlier shooting of Michael Cooper. The murder weapon was never found. And Sylvester Coles, the man who said Davis had the gun, he was never charged. The case had barely begun, but cracks were already forming. By morning, the Savannah police had their suspect, Troy Anthony Davis, a 20-year-old black man from a working-class neighborhood. He had no criminal record for violent crime. No gun was ever recovered. No physical evidence tied him to the shooting. No fingerprints, no DNA. But multiple eyewitnesses claimed Davis was the one who pulled the trigger. He would later say he didn't know he was a suspect until he saw himself on the news. The case against him would rest almost entirely on eyewitness testimony. 9 people, most of them strangers, who claimed they saw him with the gun or fleeing the scene. But what the jury didn't know then, and what the world would learn later, is that 7 of those 9 witnesses would later recant their testimony, many alleging police pressure and coercion. Some said they were young, scared, and manipulated. Others suggested the real killer was another man present that night, Sylvester "Red" Coles, the same man who first pointed the finger at Davis. But in 1989, none of that was known. A white officer was dead. A young black man was on trial. The public wanted answers. The system wanted closure. And Troy Davis? He said he was innocent. To understand the firestorm that erupted after Officer Mark MacPhail was killed, you have to go back, years before the shots were ever fired. 2 men, born into 2 very different worlds, would collide in one explosive night neither of them saw coming. Troy Anthony Davis was born in Savannah, Georgia, the oldest child of Joseph Davis, a veteran of the Korean War, and Virginia Davis, a hard-working hospital employee. His parents divorced early, and Troy, along with his 4 siblings, was raised in Cloverdale, a predominantly black, working, and middle-class neighborhood. It wasn't an easy upbringing, but it wasn't a criminal one either. Teachers at Windsor Forest High School described him as an inconsistent student, attentive one moment, distracted the next. He dropped out in his junior year, not because of trouble, but to drive his disabled younger sister to her rehabilitation appointments. Later, he earned his GED from Richard Arnold Education Center. Some said he lacked focus. Others saw something more, a dependable big brother figure in the neighborhood. They called him Raw, short for rough as hell. But many who knew him said the nickname was all bark, no bite. Still, like many young men in Savannah, Troy had brushes with the system. In 1988, he pled guilty to carrying a concealed weapon and was fined $250. Another charge, for having a gun with an altered serial number, was dropped as part of the deal. He tried to hold down steady work. That same year, Davis was hired as a drill technician at a plant that made railroad crossing gates. His supervisor said he was polite and likable, but he struggled with consistency, showing up for weeks, disappearing for months. By the end of 1988, Troy had quit for good. Yet not all signs pointed toward trouble. Davis had signed up for service in the United States Marine Corps, and he volunteered as a coach in the Savannah Police Athletic League, a community program for kids run by the very force that would later charge him with killing one of their own. That officer was Mark MacPhail. Just 27 years old, MacPhail had taken a very different road. He was the son of a U.S. Army colonel, and he followed the same path of service. After 6 years as an Army Ranger, MacPhail joined the Savannah Police Department in 1986. Known for his discipline and quiet strength, he served as a beat cop for 3 years. By the summer of 1989, he'd applied to join the Mounted Police Unit, a specialized role in crowd control and community outreach. He was married, with a 2-year-old daughter and a baby boy. That August, he was pulling an extra shift as a security guard at the Greyhound bus terminal. It was supposed to be routine. It was anything but. After his murder, hundreds of officers, local, state, even federal, attended his funeral at Trinity Lutheran Church in Savannah. He was remembered as a hero who died trying to protect a stranger. One man had built a life in law enforcement. The other stood accused of destroying it. But was it really so simple? By the time Troy Anthony Davis stepped into the courtroom of Chatham County Superior Court in Savannah, Georgia, the media had already branded him guilty. A young black man accused of murdering a white police officer, Mark MacPhail, in a state with a deep and complicated history. The pressure to convict was overwhelming. The prosecution presented 35 witnesses. Their case rested almost entirely on eyewitness testimony. There was no physical evidence linking Davis to the murder. No gun was ever recovered, not the one Davis was alleged to have used, nor the one owned by Sylvester "Red" Coles, the man who first implicated him. But it didn't seem to matter. One of the state's key witnesses was Jeffrey Sapp, a neighbor of the Davis family. Sapp testified that Davis had confessed to him shortly after the murder. But Sapp would later recant, saying police had scared him into testifying, pressuring him until he agreed to repeat their version of events. Another witness was Kevin McQueen, an acquaintance of Davis who had been locked up in Chatham County Jail at the same time. McQueen told the court that Davis confessed to shooting Officer MacPhail because he feared someone had seen him earlier that night during the shooting of Michael Cooper in Cloverdale. But even McQueen's credibility was shaky. He, too, would later retract his statement, describing it as completely fabricated and made out of spite because Davis had refused to cooperate with him. If this part shocked you, you're not alone. Subscribe to follow more real cases where truth gets buried, and justice is anything but simple. The state's only forensic testimony came from a ballistics expert who told the jury that the .38 caliber bullet that killed Officer MacPhail could have been fired from the same gun that wounded Michael Cooper earlier that night. But even that statement was vague. The expert couldn't say definitively that the bullets matched, only that the shell casings found in Cloverdale were similar to those recovered at the Burger King parking lot on Oglethorpe Avenue, where MacPhail was killed. Still, it was enough for the jury. None of the bullets could be tied directly to Davis. None of the fingerprints at the scene matched his. But multiple witnesses claimed to have seen a man in a white shirt, and Davis had been wearing white. In the minds of many, that was sufficient. The trial moved quickly. Davis's defense team struggled to counter the barrage of witnesses and the emotional weight of a fallen officer's memory. They argued that the case lacked hard evidence, that the police had ignored other suspects, most notably Sylvester Coles, who admitted to being at the scene, owned the same type of weapon, and told police Davis was the shooter. But Coles never faced charges. He wasn't even seriously investigated. In August 1991, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty on all counts, including the murder of Officer Mark MacPhail, the shooting of Michael Cooper, and the assault on Larry Young. Days later, Davis was sentenced to death. Outside the courtroom, MacPhail's family wept with relief. Inside, Davis stood stone-faced. "I didn't do it," he insisted. But as the years would pass, and as witness after witness began changing their story, cracks would start to form in the very foundation of the state's case. What happens when the evidence disappears, but the sentence remains? By the time the ink dried on Troy Davis's death sentence in August 1991, a clock had started ticking. Davis would spend the next 20 years on Georgia's death row, locked in a 6 by 9 foot cell at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Georgia. He always maintained his innocence. But as the years passed, what started as whispers of doubt grew into a national, and eventually international, outcry. At the heart of the growing controversy were the witnesses, the very people whose words had sealed Davis's fate. Of the 9 key eyewitnesses whose testimony had helped convict him, 7 later recanted or significantly altered their original stories. Some signed affidavits. Others testified in court. One by one, they came forward, saying they had lied, misidentified, or had been pressured by Savannah police detectives. Antoine Williams, who had initially told jurors he saw Davis shoot Officer MacPhail, later said he couldn't actually be sure who fired the gun. Jeffrey Sapp, who testified that Davis had confessed to him, recanted entirely, saying police had hounded and intimidated him into giving a false statement. Darrell Collins, Davis's friend and one of the only people with him that night, said he too had been forced to implicate Davis after hours of aggressive questioning. Most damning of all was the ongoing silence around Sylvester Red Coles, the man who first implicated Davis, who was present at the scene, and who owned a .38 caliber weapon, the same caliber used in the murder. Coles told police he had lost the gun before it could ever be tested. Still, the legal system moved slowly, and sometimes not at all. On September 26, 2006, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit denied Davis federal habeas corpus relief. The court ruled that Davis had not made a substantive claim of actual innocence, and had failed to prove that his original trial was constitutionally unfair. They concluded that both prosecutors and Davis's defense attorneys had acted within their professional duties. In December 2006, Davis's legal team filed a petition for panel rehearing, which was also denied. Legal experts pointed to a towering obstacle: the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, a law passed in the wake of the Oklahoma City bombing designed to speed up executions. But in doing so, it placed strict limits on how and when death row inmates could introduce new evidence, even if that evidence pointed to innocence. If something could have been presented at trial but wasn't, the courts often refused to hear it later. In Davis's case, that included nearly all of the witness recantations. As legal avenues closed, public pressure exploded. Amnesty International adopted Davis's case, calling it one of the most compelling cases of apparent innocence in decades. They launched global petitions, organized rallies, and flooded Georgia officials with letters. The Innocence Project, founded to exonerate the wrongly convicted, added their voice. Over time, a long list of advocates emerged. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Pope Benedict XVI, President Jimmy Carter, and former FBI Director William Sessions all publicly urged clemency or a retrial. These names stood up. And if you're the kind of person who questions everything, hit that subscribe button. You'll be right at home here. In 2007, the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles issued a rare stay of execution just one day before Davis was scheduled to die, a moment of hope. But it was short-lived. Between 2007 and 2011, Davis faced 4 separate execution dates, each sparking massive protests in Atlanta, Savannah, Washington, D.C., and around the world. Millions signed petitions. Celebrities tweeted. Even some of Officer MacPhail's family members began expressing doubt, wondering if the wrong man had been sentenced to die. Still, the courts held firm. The justice system, bound by precedent and procedure, focused less on the question of actual innocence and more on legal finality. Davis's appeals were dismissed not because the claims were disproven, but because they were considered procedurally barred. The system wasn't built to admit it may have made a mistake. Inside death row, Davis wrote letters. He read the Bible. He told his family and supporters, "They can take my body, but they can't take my spirit." As the final appeal loomed, the world waited, and many wondered, was Georgia about to execute an innocent man? By the summer of 2010, The eyes of the world were fixed on a federal courtroom in Savannah, Georgia. After decades of appeals and protests, Troy Anthony Davis was granted an extraordinary hearing by order of the United States Supreme Court, a rare chance to present new evidence of innocence. The hearing unfolded before U.S. District Judge William T. Moore, inside the towering Tomochichi Federal Building on Wright Square. It was the moment Davis's defense team had long prayed for. Witness after witness took the stand, not to reinforce guilt, but to unravel it. Benjamin Gordon testified he was there the night Officer Mark MacPhail was killed. He told the court he saw his own uncle, Sylvester "Red" Coles, pull the trigger. Coles, the first man to accuse Davis, did not appear in court. Judge Moore noted that decision sharply, calling Coles one of the most critical witnesses to Davis's defense. But because Coles wasn't present, much of the testimony against him was ruled inadmissible hearsay. Antoine Williams, a former key witness, returned to say he never saw the shooter. He was illiterate, he explained, and had only signed what police gave him in 1989. Jeffrey Sapp, Kevin McQueen, and Darrell Collins, all of whom had originally tied Davis to the killing, recanted under oath, each describing pressure, fear, or revenge as the motive for their false testimony. One man, Anthony Hargrove, testified that Coles had admitted the murder to him. But again, the court rejected it. Coles was not present to defend himself. Prosecutors responded with force. Savannah police detectives, lead prosecutors, and the lead investigator testified that no witness had been coerced. The shooter, they said, was described consistently as wearing a white t-shirt and dark pants, clothes Davis had been seen wearing that night. A state attorney declared the evidence overwhelming. In August 2010, Judge Moore issued his ruling. Executing an innocent person, he wrote, would violate the Eighth Amendment. But then he added, Mr. Davis is not innocent. He dismissed most recantations as smoke and mirrors, giving full credibility to only one. He called Gordon's testimony unreliable, noting he didn't even know Davis personally. Moore blamed Davis's lawyers for failing to subpoena Coles and advised them to appeal directly to the Supreme Court. In November 2010, a federal panel dismissed Davis's appeal. In March 2011, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final petition, clearing the way for Georgia to schedule his death. And it did. On September 7, 2011, Georgia set the execution date, September 21st, at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Butts County. The petitions came in like a tidal wave. Over 660,000 people, including Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Pope Benedict XVI, President Jimmy Carter, and the European Parliament, begged for clemency. Amnesty International and people of faith against the death penalty urged clergy and public officials to intervene. Yet on September 20th, the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles denied clemency. The MacPhail family stood by the original verdict. That hole in my heart will be there until the day I die, said Officer MacPhail's mother. But the execution may give me some peace. Mark MacPhail Jr., just an infant when his father died, said, "It's not about anger. It's about justice." The next day, September 21st, 2011, Troy Davis woke up knowing it would be his last. He refused the traditional last meal, stating he would fast and pray instead. No steak, no ice cream. He told his sister Martina Correa, dying herself from breast cancer, that he loved her. He wrote a final letter to his supporters. At 7 p.m., execution was scheduled to begin. But Davis's attorneys filed a last-minute appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The execution was delayed. For over 3 hours, Davis lay strapped to the gurney in Georgia's death chamber, while the nation waited. Then, at 10:20 p.m., the Supreme Court denied the stay. They would proceed. At 10:53 p.m., the warden asked Troy Davis if he had any final words. He lifted his head, looked directly at Mark MacPhail's family, and said, "I am innocent. The incident that happened that night is not my fault. I did not have a gun. I did not shoot your family member. I am sorry for your loss, but I did not take your son, father, or brother. All I can ask is that you look deeper into this case, so you can really see the truth." He turned to the prison staff and added, "May God bless your souls." At 11:08 p.m., the lethal injection began. Troy Davis blinked rapidly, then closed his eyes. At 11:19 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Outside the prison gates, thousands stood in silence, candles flickering in the Georgia night. Some prayed, some cried, others shouted in rage. But no one felt peace. Even in death, Troy Davis left the world with a question Georgia could never answer. What if they killed the wrong man? If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Let the world know Troy Davis's story didn't end in silence.